Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn. Today I have with me a friend, Tad Jones. Tad, thanks for joining the show all the way from Florida.
You bet.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. We've known each other now, about 3-4 years?
That's right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, anybody that's viewed the show for more than a few episodes knows we like to jump right into it. I'm assuming the people watching the show or listening to the podcast have busy lives, and so we want to make this time valuable. Tad, you've been in CEO roles, business owner roles, leadership roles of various types throughout your career so far. Currently own a company headquartered out of Colorado, do business across the U.S. What or who were some of your leadership role models early on or mentors, and what valuable lessons have you learned from them over the years?
So it's funny, Joel, when you sent me kind of a list of questions, I looked at this and thought I got kind of really retrospective about how my leadership journey has kind of evolved. I was historically, growing up, not the person that was naturally thought of myself as a leader. I was leadership and avoid. In other words, if there was something not going on, my perfectionist and control kind of nature took over and says, I can't handle this. Look, we got to do something about this. And so that's kind of what happened in, my, formative years. And then the funny part of how leadership has evolved for me is I can track it by decade. And so I'm going to bore you in the audience a little bit with this, but I was, in the 80s, I could quote any quote out of the movie Stripes or Caddyshack, really easy. And, that was as naive and simple as I was. I there wasn't a lot of wisdom there. There wasn't a lot of depth, a lot of shallowness. But, as I graduated in the 80s and I started wrestling with this stuff, I was the president of my fraternity in college and things like that. And so this leadership thing has always been put in front of me. And so I kind of became a student of leadership. And so, your questions about who were my mentors, I would really say it was through self-study and through books.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I as the classic leadership models evolved, I'll go back to, I actually looked it up before our interview about what Milton Friedman used to say about what a firm's purpose was. And it was to maximize shareholder value. And so all the focus was on shareholders. And I'm, 90s getting my MBA, thinking through that and what that looks like. Well, that's the purpose of the firm. And a leader's role is to maximize shareholder value. Well, that started to evolve as, I started getting into books from like the, good to great books like from Jim Collins and things like that. And I started to develop my own little leadership mantra, which was, well, that's a little one-sided, the Milton Friedman approach. And I used to come up with this term as I was coaching people. It's like our purpose is, as managers and leaders, is to balance the interests of the shareholder, customer, and employee. I thought that was a more egalitarian kind of way to look at things. And then it was backed up by books, like by John Maxwell and Ken Blanchard and all these faith-based business books too. And then I got involved in a peer advisory group. I know you're in C12, and I was in Convene for a lot of years, and started going to faith-based conferences in leadership and leading your business. And this one hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was Colleen Barrett. She was the COO of Southwest Airlines. And it was at a Convene conference, and someone asked her the question, which is more important, shareholders, customers, employees? And she didn't miss a beat. She just said, employees, customers, shareholders, in that order. And so my paradigm had switched, you see, over about 20, 30 years. It got from shareholders focus to a balanced focus to it starts with the employees. And it's like, if anybody could get anything out of this, I know that's kind of a summary question, but let's just tell them what we're going to tell them and then tell them. Get there now. Get there now. Understand that employees is the most important thing you're supposed to focus on, and the rest just takes care of itself. I mean, one of the words that I got from God early on, or even in the middle of owning our business, was, I just want you to take care of these employees, and I'll take care of something else. And my career is like very broad in terms of I've worked for 6 different industries. I had a corporate career for 20 years, and then we've owned this business almost 20 years independently, my wife and I. And so I've seen a lot of different things. And I'll tell you, and we went through the 08, 09 crash, with an SBA loan. That's when we owned the business. I mean, we've seen, and it's oil, we have an oil and gas service company, hugely volatile. I mean, we've stared death in the door, death's door, right in the face multiple times. But when God told me that, it's like, it simplified everything. Just take care of the employees and I'll take care of everything else. And that's what it was. I mean, and it took me a while to get there. It took me 30 years to understand what that really meant. So if you go back and look at, Lead Like Jesus from Ken Blanchard and the John Maxwell library of books, I mean, they're just fantastic books. The book that's like so under the radar that really cemented everything for me was called The Soul of the Firm by Bill Pollard. And he was the CEO of ServiceMaster. He was a Wheaton graduate, and he tells his story about your business is about developing people. And the stories in that book talk about developing people is developing them to be stewards in their community, good parents, good adults, good mentors to others, as well as good employees. It was a holistic view of trying to figure out what it means to develop people. So it was easy for Colleen Baird to say employees first, but Bill Pollard even took it to another level. What does it mean to develop somebody? It's to know them. Great story. I'll butcher it, but I think Bill Pollard told us in his book about a surgeon was working with, let's say, a resident in a surgery, and he's going through the surgery, and after the surgery, he says to the resident, so could you tell me the name of the nurse? Could you tell me the name of the orderly? Could you tell me the name of anybody else in that surgery? The person knew nothing. He said, tomorrow or next week or whatever it was, later down the road, I want you to tell me something about every one of those people. And, later on, it forced the guy or the, new professional, the new doctor to say, everyone in that room is important. And know something. I don't want to know what his name is. I don't want to know what his middle name is. I want to know what his wife's name is. I want to know what his son's favorite color is and why that's important. And he just humanized what it meant to be in a team environment that's crucial in a surgery and why everyone's important. And it's just little stories like that in Bill Pollard's book, and then some of the other stuff I've read from him just told the story about really what are we really doing here? I mean, we're trying to respect each other and just, you're running a business, and you're supposed to do it with all the leadership guides that you're going to get out of textbooks and your MBA program. It's like, but don't lose sight of what's the most important thing, and that's people. So,
Tad, as somebody's listening to this, they may be super experienced, leader. They may be just getting started. What are some of the ways, the hows that you found to take that message back to the workplace? Like, you matter, you're important. As a leader, what are some things I could do? Right, I like to do it. I'm big into execution.
yeah.
What can I do that you've learned over the last 30 years? What's some baby steps to, let's say I'm not that personal. I really don't know my people well. I've been all about shareholders. Where's a good place to start?
One method I use with people is kind of like, and this maybe we'll get to the point eventually, but is using core values as a talking point. So this is another shout out to the peer advisory groups that Joel we've been a part of. And I had seen vision, mission, values hang on the wall in my corporate world, and just thought, yeah, whatever.
Good marketing material.
Yeah, nobody pays attention to that. And so when I got in my own business, and I was in it for like 4 or 5 years before I joined the peer advisory group, we're gonna do your vision, mission, values. And I go, okay, here we go. But it made it executional. To your point, it's like, what did it really mean? And so as we came up with the core values in our convene group, it was like, humility, service, respect, profit with a purpose, and I had to process them. I started to understand that what's missing from the world typically is that it's not in your language. So you want to correct behavior or something that, or you've observed a behavior that doesn't align with core values. It's you're using your core values and as a part of a conversation. So if somebody did something, you're like, that was not very respectful to another employee or a customer or anybody for that matter. It's like, let's sit down and talk about what it would mean to respect somebody in this situation. And so, maybe an admonition in their mind about what you're talking about, but it's basically, if something doesn't feel right, go back to the core values, pick one off the shelf and say, which one are we going to talk about to get your point across? And so it's it's not intuitive for people to understand those core values on the wall. Take them down and use them as a tool to kind of define what your culture is. And so an anecdote doesn't come to mind, but it's really simple to say to watch good behavior. For example, Fred, I want to tell you something. Thank you for, I know you were right about that situation, but that customer was arguing. It's just like, you humbled yourself and you said, we want you to feel comfortable with the service we provide. Let us do what we can do to make this right for you. Doesn't mean he was right or wrong, but you humbled yourself to deliver service, for example. So it's basically taking those things off the shelf and applying them, good, bad, or indifferent, to any kind of situation. So it's making it real, and it's one of the things that's been great about being an independent business owner is you're able to impact things so much more, as opposed to you can try that in the corporate world, and I always tried to do that, but man, it just gets swallowed up. You don't get rewarded for doing those kind of things in the corporate sense, but we have a great position of influence in our businesses to be able to do that.
How many times did you take a deep dive into your core values? Did you write them once? Did this go on for several months? How'd you come up with your core values?
Well, okay, so as I kind of put some notes together for our talk today, at the end of it, I thought, well, it looks like it's going to be Confession Tuesday. So I'll just, I know one of your questions.
I always say there's two ways to get wisdom: my own mistakes or the mistakes of somebody else, and I prefer the latter.
Well, I got plenty of my own. I got a lot of lessons from that. Didn't have time to look around the room. But anyway, I know one of your questions was, what are your failures? But it's interesting that I internalized the development of core values inside my peer advisory group. And I brought them to the team, my management team. And then a couple of years later, I realized they weren't a part of this. They weren't a part of helping define core values. And like I said, we're in a volatile industry. I mean, when these things were developed, 10 years ago, we literally laid off most of our company within 3 years. So it was hard to get momentum with kind of, even though you're in a small business trying to do corporate structural things to kind of build momentum for the long haul. So I would argue that was one of my mistakes. I tried to correct it a little bit and just have dialogue about the core values. So what does that mean to you? Okay, so we're not changing these things. Humility, service, respect, profit with purpose. By the way, I think some of those came right out of Bill Pollard's book. I think that's where I got some of them. These are tenets that are, they're bedrock. They're going to be good. But I tried to get it to be a dialogue so we could say, well, what does that look like to you? For this, we have really challenging business where people go out in the oil field and work, and it's like, well, what does humility look like in a situation on a well site, for example? So we created a dialogue. It usually was easy. The things came to me, like I mentioned earlier. We've got a situation here. All right, let's take, and it's like a situation, whether it's a safety issue or we got somebody who's gonna get a fight on a well site. It's a rough world out there in the oil field, and it's like, okay, let's take a deep breath. Okay, what's this assess situation? Let's do it through the lens of our core values, and it really became a language. So it was a backdoor way of kind of getting them by. They could see them as a tool to help them manage, because a lot of times I had young managers that were they'd come from the field, and then all of a sudden they're managing somebody in the field, so they were in development. So it was a good tool. We were able to use it pretty good.
Besides core values, I think that's a great place to start. By the way, thank you for sharing that. Any other practical ways to show the employees that they matter?
Okay, confession number 2. You're gonna have to keep track here how many confessions I come up with today.
We can always capture the recording and play it back.
Do you edit these, Joe? We can take some out. No.
All raw.
Okay. One of the core values was humility, service, respect, and profit with a purpose. And when we came up with those, it was good times. We did a lot of charitable giving to the company, and we let teams decide where to direct giving, and so it worked well. And then of course we went through multiple downturns, and profit with a purpose was not something we were able to do as a company. And then secondarily, we do something we can talk a little about later if it comes up, about how we do employee satisfaction. We use Net Promoter Score to measure, usually it's used with customers, but you can use it internally with employees to say, would you recommend this place as a place to work? And one of some of the feedback we got was, why are we giving all this money away to charities? Why don't you just pay us more? It's just 2x4 right here. And wow, and that has stuck with me. And to this day, I still wrestle. And I had some wise people talk to me about the spirit of generosity really isn't born out of you directing someone else's money. And so the original idea we had about profit with a purpose really probably was ill-advised. I'm sure we benefited a lot of people, and some people were touched by it. But in hindsight, the spirit of generosity needs to come from within. There needs to be some sacrifice when you're giving to somebody else. So that I'm trying to get to answer your question, though. What we did for employees was we turned it into kind of a loyalty bonus. And so it's evolved over time, but it's just the old-fashioned attaboy bonus. It's like we try to use models like tenure, subjective performance, or just above and beyond kind of frameworks. And we've tinkered around with all of them. But just I realized from that feedback, it's like at the end of the day, just pay me more. That's that. But there's got to be a quid pro quo here. I mean, there's got to be. It's for you're part of a team. You're behaving well. We all keep the team goals in mind. We're all working towards the same thing, and so sharing profits was still a concept that we wanted to keep. But the original tenet behind that core value really was kind of it didn't have staying power. It didn't really work.
So have you changed that core value, or have you left it?
Wow, it's going to need adjusted again. Actually, it's just great. One of the, as one of the challenges of small business is like it feels like everyone's just kicking you to the side. We're actually in a lawsuit right now over Fair Labor Standards Act violations, and the irony is, we pay overtime, but it's without getting into too much detail. Basically, it's come down to our loyalty bonus is basically not legal, believe it or not.
Wow.
But you can't do fixed non-discretionary bonuses. We would argue it's discretionary. It's going to get caught up in court. But basically, what they're saying is, well, how are you representing overtime hours in a loyalty bonus? Well, if it was an annual bonus, how do you do that? It's somebody put that in a spreadsheet for me. But sometimes the law gets in the way of common sense. So we're gonna have to come up with something different. So we'll adjust it probably to make really clear that it's ad hoc. It's probably less. It won't be as formulaic. It won't be to everyone. It'll have to be super discretionary so that it passes muster in terms of that context. Anyway, didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it's something that's evolving. I mean, we're still trying to evolve and reward people for good behavior and for when they're helping somebody out, that above and beyond kind of thing.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, though, Tad, because sometimes as business owners, we want to just do one and done. Okay, I did this, check the box. And you're like, no, it's an evolution thing. It's trial and error. It's you might not get it right. But that didn't mean you've abandoned the idea that core values are important or that your people are important.
That's right.
You said, if I got to go through a lawsuit to get this right, I want to do the right thing. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong.
Actually, Joel, and it's a great point you make, is that we're going to be better off with this new system because I'll get into, economic models, socialism versus capitalism. If it's formulaic and everybody gets a bonus, then it's actually muted. I feel I'm going to feel better about this new system. And I wouldn't have got there. Like you said, check the box. We have a system. What's the next challenge? But no, there's silver lining in everything. If you have a good attitude about stuff like that, it's like, you know what? I am going to be happier with this new system. So,
and your employees will be too.
Yeah, I think those are the ones that are really performing. And then, we have another, one of our missions is to be the best and to be the biggest in our field. And so it's funny, but my CEO and I were talking about this the other day. Well, how are we going to handle this situation? And I just said, it's called the Be the Best Award. We're just going to call it Be the Best Award. And after we got off the phone, I'm like, wow, that conversation would have never happened if we hadn't just got off the phone with the attorneys about this situation.
Right.
And so
that's right.
Back to making it executable and actionable. We've been trying to get to be the best culture, out there, like, well, what's the value of being the best? Well, might get to be the best for it. We didn't have that term a month ago.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's worked out.
You mentioned John Maxwell, Ken Blanchard. You said a lot of your mentorships come through books. Um, was that something you learned early on? Something like, did it just dawn on you, or you look back over time and go, "Oh, okay, that's where that came from."
We were talking before, Joel. One of my strengths finder characteristics is learner, and
Mhm.
so I'm a learner. So I'm glad you brought me back to that, because that my style was to learn through books, and I could recite things out of books, and people would say, "Where do you get all that wisdom?" I says, "I just read a lot." But the funny part of that is, as we talked about the decades transition of leadership models, this is no joke. 10, 15 years ago, uh, I just got this notion from God that just says, you know what? You're done reading business books. You're not in the Word enough. And
Mm,
I'm telling you, uh, he it was one of those things that evolved over time. That's why I say 10 to 15 years ago, I don't know exactly when it happened, but I
mhm,
remember, yeah, I got in, as you and I know, because the ministries were involved with, we got into more in recent 5 or more years, my wife and I, in ministries that were just, we're abiding in the Word, and we're constantly, journaling and doing those kind of practices. And that wasn't a discipline I had more than 15 years ago. It literally, Joe, what happened is my desire to read books is gone.
mm,
Kind of weird. And it's just
mhm.
like, I more often than not would rather just pick up the Bible and read the Bible than read a book. And if I'd said that 10 years ago, I'd have said, "You're nuts." I wouldn't have believed that, but that's what happened. It started as kind of a learner model. I'm still in learner mode, but
Mhm.
it's like I'm getting it straight from the source, instead of trying to get it through somebody else. All those years were great years. All those people
Yeah.
were authors, great lessons,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's kind of a wisdom seeking directly now instead of just through
Well,
somebody else.
I'm glad you shared that, Tad, because in some ways I've had similar experiences. But when you run in leadership circles, leaders are readers. What seminars have you been to lately? What training have you been to? All those things are fine. All those things are good. Uh, but there comes a point, and I actually heard a leader that has a worldwide organization just say recently, he goes, "Look, I'm 70, whatever, 6 years old. At some point, I've got to become the mentor, the leader, the source of reference. People are asking me, well, who are you following these days? And he says, I've followed and named off, all these mentors in his life. Um, but now it's my turn to wear that hat.
Yeah.
Those guys are either left the planet or about to, and so I've got to step into that role for the next generation.
Yeah, it's funny, because in some ways I don't feel up to date. I don't feel up to speed with the latest and greatest.
Mhm,
What's the guy's name? Simon Sinek, and some of those guys
mhm,
are just
mhm.
fantastic thinkers.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love them, but I'm learning it from somebody else, usually secondhand. I'm usually slow to the punch now. Um, Another sidebar, back to my quoting stupid movies from the '80s. It's like no one gets my jokes anymore. I'll do a line from Seinfeld in the '90s, and people are like, I guess you don't know who Seinfeld is. Never mind.
So you reminded me of something, little rabbit trail here.
Yeah.
One of my good friends for over 30 years, he and I have lunch still, several times a year and catch up. And a couple of lunches ago, he came in, he's kind of looked a little down. I'm like, dude, what's up? He goes, I'm just kind of feeling old. I said, what happened? He goes, on my way over here, I'm walking out past the reception desk, and he goes, "We got some younger staff, and the receptionist is probably in her 20s, and she's talking to another person in their 20s, and the other one says, "Yeah, I was spent the whole weekend watching classic movies, and so he's ready to hear, Frank Sinatra or one of those old classics." And she goes, "Yeah, there was this one I'd never heard of before, Pretty Woman. It was a really cool story,
Classic.
classic movie." He's like, oh my goodness, now I'm considered classic. The it just rocked
But
his world.
back to your point about the wisdom role, though, it's like, don't sweat pop culture, basically, is what a
Hmm.
lot of the stuff is. And so it's like, wisdom is timeless and ageless. And so
Mhm.
you're right. Now's the time to start giving that kind of stuff back.
Well, but before the show, we were talking a little bit about AI and some of the ways we've been using it. And one of the things that I'm actually exploring that timeless wisdom comment you just made with AI in my spare time. And I'll let you know what comes of it, whether it turns into a book or a
Yeah.
teaching or what. But there is ancient wisdom that just gets repackaged so often, and that's why you pick up a leadership book from the 40s or 50s that was literally groundbreaking in leadership theory, and you pick up something from the 80s and you're like, oh, there's similarities there. You pick up something from the
Yeah.
20 teens, and it's like, oh, that sounds a lot like that book in 2030, 1930s. And
Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. At our
yeah,
age, it's just like, yeah, that's really what happened with reading business books. I kind of like, I get it. I get it. New techniques, new methods, but yeah, the truths are
yeah,
still,
and the fundamentals, the fundamentals are still what gets the job done.
yeah,
Whether in sports or business or what. It's if you go back, some of the greatest leaders that we still admire today in a positive way were very much people persons. They were very much cared about people. You think of Jesus, for example, was very compassionate on the crowds. The religious leaders of the day didn't appreciate him, but
right.
the people of that time did. And you look at even modern day leaders, Mother Teresa, um, she was all about people, and yet still considered one of the most influential people of all time. So people want to have relationship and genuine authenticity. We hear that a lot, and transparency. You even hear those kind of comments in leadership circles, like we need to be authentic with each other. We need to be transparent. And I'm glad to hear you say that's what you've been learning over the last 30 years.
If you want to talk to anybody 2 or 3 generations younger than us, you gotta be like that. I mean, it's when you
True.
talk millennials or Gen Z or whatever, it's like it's a different ballgame. They want to operate at a level that we didn't operate at when we were early in our careers.
I'm glad you said that because we beat up on them quite a bit, right? The older generations, like, oh, those guys have no work ethic. They
Yeah,
don't have their life together. They're et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing they do really well is relationship. I mean,
yeah.
compared to us, for sure. They may have their weaknesses, but they certainly value a relationship. I think in a healthier way
Well, and
than this
that's what
generation did.
we can blame a lot on COVID, but in the work remote phenomenon, but they're just not going to tolerate, standoffish people that don't communicate well, that aren't, like your point is, authentic or transparent. They're not, so if you're going to have any kind of employee base that's going to be committed, you're going to, leaders have to move into them. We have to humble ourselves a little bit, to
Mm.
get down to what they want, what works for them, and how what their communication styles are, not just autocratic, which is probably most of the way we operated or were operated on, let's say, when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned humility just now. What humility often comes from failures. What have been some of your greatest failures, and what did you
uh,
learn from them?
yeah, mostly in people decisions. Hiring, firing, whatever. The my big mantra nowadays is in I'm talking business, mentoring, family life, talking to our kids, is I use of the word self-awareness. And I I identify with people that have self-awareness so much better in the last 5 or more years than I did in the past. And I also recognize it in myself. So how many times have we worked with people and they're just not getting it? They're in a job function they don't like or they don't desire, and they're not doing well. They have no self-awareness. So you're talking to them, trying to mentor them maybe out of a situation or a job. You ask them 3 or 4 questions and you realize they've never asked themselves these questions. They don't even
Mm,
know why they're here. And so it's a
mhm,
sad state of how, I don't know how we get here as a society, but our society lacks a lot of self-awareness. Well, most of my mistakes historically have been uh, from lacking self-awareness. I mean, if I were number like hiring decisions or something like that, I was reflecting on about how I would, let's say, God told me to keep the people first, and then I have all these other objectives and priorities, and then I get to this interview of a key person, and well, he would fit that hole there, he would fit that hole, and let's say I hired the person, and then I realized years later I lost track of what the priority was. This wasn't someone who was going to take care of people per se. They were going to do great at this area, and then I said, how did I end up there? See, it's like a self-awareness audit.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened? It's like, well, you're a little hasty, you're impatient, and you're trying to always do too many things. You got too many irons in the fire. Keep it simple, stupid, kind of. It would be a lesson I continue to need to learn over and over. And so, yeah, over accommodation of people. I mean, I recognized that years ago. So this is one that backfires on you. You want to be kind. You want to help somebody out, but I'm not self-aware that they're not self-aware. And it's like, I'm gonna, years later, particular person I may have in mind, it's like, I wasn't helping that person out. I was over accommodating them, and they may have wasted 2 years in me trying to help. And so, that's, I ask my kids primarily, it's like, I identify self-awareness. When I see it, I say, that's great self-awareness. You're processing, you're understanding your situation, you're understanding someone else's situation. A lot of, let's say family conflict or whatever issues we might have, it's being able to recognize. We hear these trite comments like walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, and I've used it all my life, but every year it gets that a little bit more meaning to it. And it's like that person that might be annoying you, whether it's, friend, employee, whatever, over time, if you are aware of their situation, what they're dealing with, all of a sudden stress or frustration turns into compassion. It's happened more in the last 5 years of my life than I can imagine. It's just because you take the time to pause and just understand why you're reacting the way you are to somebody. First, understand yourself, and then try to get them to self-awareness. Why are you doing this? It's just a relational tool. How you communicate to people. So I would say, if you looked at a general categorization of all my decisions or failures, it's been from lack of self-awareness, trying to get ahead of myself, not recognizing what was at stake at the time of the decision.
What you said something there I think is worth double clicking on. You said get ahead of yourself. What motivated you to not be self-aware? What was the circumstances around it?
We're going into psychological waters now. I think one of the things that, personally, as I aspire and get towards self-awareness, was really what perfectionism has done to me historically. The hastiness on getting to the answer, patience, get ahead of myself, was really probably performance driven. And so that's another check in your spirit to say, well, what's the rush here, right? There's a new phraseology using with kids and friends and relatives' kids, and that is that life's not a race. And I could apply that to a lot of people. My daughter, after college, went to Spain and taught English for 3 years, which was not a traditional path towards a career or whatever. And I could just see in her heart, she wanted to go somewhere and build her confidence. And I just immediately coined the term, life is not a race. God bless you. Find what God has in store for you. Seek, just live life, with passion and all that. And I came up with all those great comments to encourage my daughter, and I realized I need to look in the mirror. Repeat these mantras to myself in the morning. And that's just what happens is it's easy to put the thorn out of somebody else's eye or observe what else is going on. How's that apply to me? It's been a big breakthrough for me. It's just learning what self-awareness means, and then try to assess these things and habits that I've had my whole life. Get ahead of myself.
Do you think sometimes we throw self-awareness out the window, especially as business owners or leaders, because of the pressure of the business demands? Like, I got to get this position filled. I got to get this product shipped.
Well, we might, ironically, we would think altruistically, well, I'm putting myself last. I'm putting others first. you know, get the product out the door. It's like, well, who you damaging along the way? Who you wounded along the way? You know, business drivers take priority without, you know, recognizing, you know, you're cognizant of what's going on around you. So absolutely, we got to be careful with that.
Where do you see, and I've been using this word more and more the last few years because leaders don't like to use this word. Where do you see fear coming into play in the decision-making process?
Should I just go lay down on the couch now? Because now we're getting into my other psychological weakness. Yeah, that's always been a driver for me. Don't ask me how I got there, but operating out of fear. It's, you know, I heard a term recently. It's like, let fear drive you. It's like, it's not God wants us to do, but it does. It motivates. It gets you off the dime. It kind of gets you to perform. It's like, someday someone needs to write a book, or I need to journal this stuff out, because our culture thinks like that. And that is not, fear not. You know, how many times we hear the words fear not? What is wrong in that we let fear drive us? I'm still sorting that one out. That's very true.
Yeah, and there is certainly energy in fear, right? I mean, if you're a Star Wars fan, there's a lot of monologues about the, you know, the dark side, the power of the dark side, and all of that. You know, and certainly adrenaline junkies, right? You know, let's do the fear thing, and I think some of that's probably just mislabeling of the, you know, semantics or something. But to your point, I don't think we're wired to fear. I think we're looking for a relationship, we're looking for safety, we're looking for acceptance, we're looking for things that are anti-fear.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard the term stress kills. Well, fear is cousin, I mean, of stress. I mean, it's not good for your health. It's not, you know, anxiety and all those kind of things, and fear of failure. I mean, that's going through the years of our business. I mean, that, I would confess, that was a big driver. Fear of failure. It's like, what kind of stress did that bring to our family situation? You know, when I was taking the fear of failure at work, home. So yeah, it's something that needs worked out.
Well, you know, you think about this idea of fear in its extreme. We never think of it as a good thing. You think about walking through the haunted house. You don't, I mean, afterwards it may be fun, or the adrenaline or whatever, but nobody goes, oh, that was a good kind of fear.
Right.
You grow up, you witness a murder when you're a kid, and you grow up not able to sleep with the lights out. Nobody thinks that's healthy.
No.
You know, but yet we like to toy with fear, you know, and fear has torment, and it opens the door to thoughts that are, you know, certainly not healthy. That what you do hear, I've heard leaders say over the years, is, what would you attempt if you knew you couldn't fail?
Yeah.
What would you do if there was no fear attached? You know,
it's like, enlightening. I mean, I played that exercise myself. Did it with my son recently. So imagine life where you lived without fear. What could you accomplish? It's like, once you start thinking like that, you realize what an inhibitor it is. And so, yeah, it's a good exercise.
Tad, how do you define success as a leader? And you can either answer at the same time or follow on question. How do you measure it? So first, how do you define it?
Yeah. This is maybe more of an individualistic answer, but it became clear to me after I'd been in the corporate world, and then when it was in the small business world, owning a business for at least 5 years, it came down to a really simple statement. Your business has a culture where people love to come to work, and you just got to let that sink in. No one loves to come to work, but when you see it, when you see somebody who loves to come to work, put it in a bottle and then ask yourself, why is that? Well, I believe that's the owner, the management, you know, the leaders in the organization are the primary drivers to what's that culture like. And so I mentioned the Net Promoter Score earlier. That's how we measure it. I mean, employee satisfaction once a quarter. In other words, would you recommend this place to work? And about 5 other follow-on questions. You know, are you respected? They go back to core values. But I remember, you know, at our peak, we had like close to 200 employees in 2014, and that's when we were doing a lot of charitable giving. I remember talking to our staff, and our staff was probably 30, 40 people at that time. We have a lot of field employees that are spread out across the country, but just talking to the staff about I want everyone to understand where this vision, mission, values come from. They come from my heart, and they come from, I've never enjoyed any place I've ever worked. I enjoy certain aspects of it,
Mm-hmm.
The challenge. I love business,
Mm-hmm.
but did I love the place I worked? No. I said, if I do anything and haven't owned this business, it's that we aspire to create a place where people love to come to work. They are respected. They enjoy each other. Everyone's got challenges and struggles with people at work, but if we're all paddling the boat in the same direction, and we have a supportive environment, you're more apt to be able to enjoy coming to work. And nobody's perfect. We're not going to love 100% of the people we work with, but if we respect them, and it raises the bar
Mm-hmm.
on creating that culture. And the other one, I know it came out of some of the questions you were asking, was pure accountability. That's one thing, the way we maintain the culture. And it's fun. I implemented this probably 10 years ago when we started doing the core staff started doing status reports in open letter format. So it's not a status report to my boss, it's a status report to the team.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole expectation was that no secrets, and how are we working towards team goals? Yeah, you can have individual conversations, one-on-ones with, from a performance point of view with an employee, but status reports we're all trying to move the football down the field in the same direction. Wow, how are we doing that? And so it was like magic. It really worked. Initially, I thought, well, would I like to do that if I had to send my status report for everybody? Because I had people do status reports for me for years in my corporate world. And I'm not sure how well it would have worked, but it worked in our own business. And then we took it to the next level. At the bottom of every email, somebody put a stress indicator, 1 to 5, stress. And what I was trying to accomplish, and it worked, it's like, if somebody's under stress, you might take a little more time at the water cooler. Everything all right with you? It's like all of a sudden, everyone's not thinking individualistically. They're thinking in a fellowship context. They're thinking in a team context. Like, is everything all right? And we don't get any more personal than that. Like, is it stress at work or stress at home? Some people are overshare. Some people want to share. And some people are just like, if you watch somebody and they're always a 2, they're good at it too. If 5 is super stressed and 1 is I'm not stressed. But if you see them go to a 3, something's going on. And you pay attention. If people pay attention, some people don't pay attention, but in general, it opens the door for a conversation. Then we added the happiness. Because remember what I started out saying, are you happy when you come to work? Do you enjoy coming to work? Do you love coming to work? So we have 2 now, stress and happiness. I mean, you could be stressed. It's kind of invigorating. I went from a 2 to a 3. Man, I'm still 1. I'm just loving this. I'm still a 1. But, it's amazing. Not everybody does a great job of maintaining the more emotive, expressive piece will really maintain their numbers. Some guys' numbers never change, but it opened a conversation starter for, this is how we respect each other as a team. And so
that's good.
You can model behavior all day long and say, I say the right things, I do the right things, but implement things in your systems that encourage that when you're not in the room. See, so that's kind of,
I have an idea for a new product. We'll take it offline.
Bring it on.
So you say you do the NPS scores. I know organizations do NPS scores annually. Some do, quarterly. Some have an acceptable range. What do you do with the NPS scores? When do you freak out? Has it got to move a couple of points one way or the other?
Well, let me give you this halo effect is always, when you're giving it the idea around your head at the moment might not be real objective. The halo effect of that answer to that question is, to really make it practical, is when the numbers are down, guess what? Oil price is probably down and we're probably laying off. So are they things that you can control or are they not? So the correlation between that NPS score and how the business is doing are really correlated. In other words, it's probably even less of a fact of, well, we're creating a good work environment, we're taking care of our field employees. But the subjective commentary that comes in that's why quarterly is probably more important to us than just annually, because like we haven't upgraded our computers in 2 years, and all of a sudden we're getting all this feedback from the field. It's like it's stuff that it's really easy to oversee when you're sitting in the office or the shop, and you're not the guy out in the field. So this watching the score is important. We have a target for the score, knowing that when there's a downturn, it's typical oil industry for our wages to get adjusted down a little bit, and of course NPS scores drop as a result. But you can look at data and trends. After we've been doing it over 8 years, and it's like, well, we had this downturn here and we had this downturn here, and the numbers didn't dip as much. What was different? So the scores still matter. Subjective feedback, so it really helps though. And then what we usually do is follow up with a newsletter and say, here's what you guys told us. I have the staff do it, operations and sales, and the CEO write a little bit about here's what we heard you say. Here's what we're doing to address it. Feedback loops are big. I just, my biggest mantra early on was that I'm an engineer by trade. I'm an electrical controls engineer. Everything's about a feedback loop. And so taking a survey and not giving them feedback on what you heard and what you're doing about it is useless. So our newsletter.
If you're a leader listening to this podcast and you never heard what Tad just said before, listen to what Tad just said. He said, if you're going to do a survey and not give feedback, it's useless. And I would go even further, Tad, and I think you'd agree. It's actually damaging.
Yeah.
To take a survey and not give feedback of what you intend to do with the feedback. Because employees, you do that once or twice, where are they motivated to give you a survey?
It actually is a negative effect. You better off not do the survey, because if you do a survey and don't act on it or respond to it, you're not genuine. You're like phony. You're like, well, we care. Here's a survey. But you're really saying you don't care. You're looking hypocritical. You'd be better off not doing the survey.
Yeah, good point. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Have you noticed cyclical data in your survey score, your total score, your NPS score? For those that aren't familiar with NPS, it's an attempt to collect basically customer feedback or customer sentiment, in this case, employee sentiment, across a broad range of industries. In theory, you could look at your competitor's NPS score without revealing any proprietary information and make some assumptions on that if you could get that data. So don't want to break down NPS any further than that, but it's usually a simple question. How likely are you to refer your friends or family to this product or this company or this service? And in your case, you're asking the employees, how likely are you to tell your friends and family about the job opportunities here or this workplace, or speak kindly about our company? But did you ever find a pattern that had to do with seasons? In other words, they gave you higher scores in January because they're optimistic for the new year, and you saw the scores fall during the summer because we're halfway and didn't get as far as we thought we were going to get. You ever see any data like that?
I don't recall seeing it, but I absolutely believe it would exist. I mean,
I've had that experience. That's why I was curious if you'd have.
Well, I can extrapolate and just say we don't do much work in North Dakota now, but in the heyday, if you're working in North Dakota in January, your NPS score might be a little lower. It is bitter cold up there. So
That's a good point.
it would be, I mean, we do it by region too, by the way. When we're a big enough company, we could say we would do NPS by the North region or the South region. And yeah, you should probably identify that. There's a lot of variables going on there, so you got to be careful. But yeah, I believe that would exist.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate about what you shared is where a lot of people get wrapped up in the score, right? Well, the score was 78, and now it's 76. And what happened? What did we do wrong? We've been 78 for 3 quarters in a row. But that's where I think a lot of people make mistakes with NPS, and where you've done well from the sounds of it is you go to the feedback.
Yeah.
Well, the score is something we track, but what really matters is what other people say. in the comments.
Let me tell you a funny story about that. It's kind of a silly way to approach this, but this actually happened. I mean, let's say I had operations managers that we're not getting a good score, and they weren't doing a good job. They weren't doing a good job of soliciting feedback, encouraging employees. You're trying to say, come on, care about the employees, care about the employees. I'm going to try to show you guys how to care about the employees. But I said to them, you know what? Game the score. Tell you what, game the score. Well, we just can't get the NPS score up. I says, well, have you talked to anybody about what they rated it? Well, no. Why don't you sit down, interview every person, say, why did you give me it? Why did you say you wouldn't want to work here? And I go, if you can get them to change next round, talk them into changing their score up. Hey, people are people, they're not dumb. In other words, it forced the operations managers to have a conversation with them about what is it that you don't like about this place? Because they were, again, going through a check the box. Well, write a newsletter and, you're still doing kind of surfacey, arm's length kind of interaction. Mm-hmm. See if you can get that score up by talking to every employee. Game the score. Show me you can game the score. And if the score goes up, guess what? I don't care. It's a success story because now did they manipulate him and they pay him $20 under the table? Whatever. They had a conversation with them about it, and that's all I'm trying to get to happen. So it's fun.
And that's honestly that's what employees want, right? They want to be heard.
Yeah, that's right.
Here's our PCs are getting old, and you go, hey, we heard this is affecting your performance in the field. We'll put that in the budget for 2024.
That's right.
You're talking a lot about fostering culture. Last question I have for you today is how do you foster a culture of inclusivity and diversity? That's been a big, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, been a big thing in the media. People that left and right, have strong opinions on that. When you hear a question like that, where's your heart go, and how do you try to live that out?
So I think we've kind of addressed it actually. The fostering culture, I think my answers are we've talked about them, but to re-highlight them was using core values as a part of your language to talk about behavior, good results, missed expectation results, those kind of things. And then using peer accountability, to create a culture where we share or care about each other. Sales oversold, operations can't meet the goals, or operations is sitting there getting ready to have to lay people off because sales isn't selling. And so that open letter format of status reports, hey, well, at least we see that salespeople are hitting their targets on sales calls, and they're not doing it because I can see their sales reports. So creating a culture of pure accountability. We're accountable to each other. We're not individuals. The inclusivity part of that question, I kind of ignored at first because I know what that's kind of leading itself to. It leads to a question about diversity and those kind of things. And I would rather just say, let's just work as a team. I don't want forcing the conversation about those kind of things. It seems a backwards way to do it. The reality is inclusivity is what you want to perform as a team anyway. And so setting systems in place like this open letter format, status reports, feedback loops, on net promoter scores, all those things are a culture of the company cares. Actually, we are trying to create this. We are trying to make this a good place to work. So it's not just leading by example. It's actually systems in place that if people are executing the systems, they're doing that. They're actually creating a culture where people are working together. People are inclusive of each other. They're checking in on people's stress and happiness scores, things like that. And I think things do just take care of themselves if that kind of culture is in place. It's the intangibles of leadership and management that we underestimate. So,
well, it sounds like you've worked hard at building a good culture, and that's not easy to do. I spent a lot of time with leaders, and that's something that we wrestle with constantly, and we do want people to feel like, hey, I want to be here. Hey, I was happy to wake up this morning. I get to go to work.
Yeah.
Not I have to go to work.
Exactly.
So bravo to you and Monica for trying to create organizations where the people feel like they're cared for, genuinely cared for.
Yeah, it's a mission
that they matter.
It's like you said, it's not easy, but you got to make it part of your mission.
Yeah. Well, Tad, I've enjoyed our time together. Any final thoughts?
Same. Not really. I excited to hear you continuing on with C12, and and working in that organization, it's one of the best things I ever did was join a faith-based peer advisory group. I recommend it to everybody, and even for people that aren't business owners, I say your fellowship communities and accountability groups are key in life. So it was a good experience for me, and it's great to see you continuing on to that.